The discovery of colossal oil reserves turned impoverished countries into financial powers overnight. And suddenly, that forgotten strait became the most critical artery of the modern economy. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, all depend on this passage to export their wealth. Without the Strait of Hormuz, billions of dollars remain trapped, with no exit to the open ocean. But to understand why this place is so dangerous, you need to look at who lives on each shore. On one side, Iran, one of the oldest and proudest nations on the planet. On the other, the Arab Gulf states, wealthy, modern, and deeply connected to the West. And above it all, hovering over this region like a permanent shadow, the United States. The American military presence in the Persian Gulf is not an accident. It is a strategic decision maintained for decades. Since World War II, Washington understood that controlling access to Gulf oil meant controlling the world. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet operates permanently from Bahrain, just miles from the strait. It is the largest concentration of naval power on any body of water on the planet. And this presence has one clear purpose: to ensure no country ever closes the strait. Because if anyone could close the strait, that someone would be Iran. The Iranian coastline dominates the entire northern shore of the strait, with natural cliffs that form perfect defensive positions. For decades, Iran installed anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and fast attack boats along this coast. The strategy is simple and terrifying. If threatened, Iran can turn the strait into a kill zone. Floating and subsurface naval mines can be deployed in hours, blocking navigation for weeks. Mine clearance is a slow, dangerous process that puts ships and crews at extreme risk. But Iran never actually needed to close the strait to cause global panic. A single threat, a military exercise, a drone over a tanker, and oil markets go into frenzy. In 1988, the world saw how far this tension could escalate. During the Iran-Iraq War, both countries attacked each other's tankers in what became known as the Tanker War. Hundreds of ships were hit by missiles and mines, turning the Gulf into a naval war zone. Oil prices skyrocketed, insurers refused to cover ships, and global trade shuddered. The United States responded with Operation Earnest Will, escorting tankers with warships. It was the first time in the modern era that a navy openly protected the flow of oil. And during that operation, one of the darkest events in the strait's history occurred. In July 1988, the American cruiser USS Vincennes shot down an Iranian civilian airliner. 290 people died, including 66 children. Iran Air Flight 655 was mistaken for an Iranian military fighter jet. For Iran, this event was never an accident. It was a deliberate act of war against civilians, and that wound never healed. It feeds Iranian distrust of the West to this day. But the 1990s brought an apparent calm to the strait. With the end of the Iran-Iraq War and Iraq's defeat in Kuwait, the region entered a phase of guarded stability. Oil flowed, prices remained manageable, and the world turned its attention to other problems. But beneath that calm, something was quietly transforming inside Iran. The country was beginning to develop its nuclear program, and that would change the entire geopolitical equation of the region. For Iran, nuclear energy meant sovereignty, technological independence, an inalienable right. For Israel and the United States, it was an existential threat disguised as a civilian program. And the Strait of Hormuz returned to the center of the global conversation as Iran's primary pressure card. The Iranian logic was straightforward. If the world wants to suffocate us with sanctions, we suffocate the world by cutting off oil. And that threat was not empty, because Iran had the means to carry it out. Hundreds of fast attack boats armed with missiles, capable of swarming and vanishing among the islands. Anti-ship missiles hidden in tunnels carved into coastal mountains, virtually impossible to destroy preemptively. Small submarines operating in shallow waters where large warships cannot easily maneuver. It is a strategy called area denial, making the strait impassable for anyone. And it is not just theory. Iran has demonstrated this capability multiple times. In 2019, the world watched in shock when two tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman. Explosions struck the hulls of ships carrying Japanese and Norwegian petroleum. The United States accused Iran, releasing footage of Iranian military personnel removing an unexploded mine from one of the hulls. Iran denied it, but the message was clear. This strait can be closed at any moment. Weeks later, Iranian forces shot down an American surveillance drone over the strait. The American president authorized a retaliatory strike against Iran, then canceled the operation 10 minutes before launch. The world was 10 minutes away from open war at the most volatile point on the planet. But the tension did not diminish, it merely transformed. In September 2019, drones and missiles struck Saudi Arabia's largest oil processing facilities. The attack on Abqaiq and Khurais cut Saudi production in half. 5% of the world's oil supply vanished in a single night. It was the largest attack on petroleum infrastructure in history, and it proved that the vulnerability extends far beyond the strait. The entire chain of Gulf oil production and export is a massive, vulnerable target. Now imagine what happens when that vulnerability combines with an advancing nuclear program. In 2015, a historic diplomatic agreement attempted to contain Iran's nuclear program. The Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, limited uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. For a brief moment, it seemed like diplomacy had won. But in 2018, the United States unilaterally withdrew from the agreement. The maximum pressure policy imposed the harshest sanctions ever applied against a nation. The goal was to force Iran to renegotiate on terms more favorable to the West. The result was the opposite. Iran accelerated its nuclear program and intensified its aggressive posture in the strait. Ships were seized, drones were shot down, and the strait was back in headlines across the world. Iran began seizing foreign tankers as a form of pressure and retaliation. The British tanker Stena Impero was captured by the Revolutionary Guard in July 2019. The crew was detained for weeks while the diplomatic world scrambled to negotiate their release. Each incident like this sends shockwaves through global financial markets. The price of oil is like a seismograph. Any tremor in the strait registers as an earthquake on the charts. And it is not just oil. Through Hormuz also passes 1/3 of the world's liquefied natural gas. Qatar, the largest LNG exporter on the planet, depends entirely on this strait to access the global market. If Hormuz closes, Europe and Asia face an energy crisis without precedent in the modern era. Factories shut down, heating fails in winter, food prices spike because transportation costs surge. A crisis in the strait is not a regional problem. It is a cascading collapse that reaches every person on the planet. And there is another factor that many people forget. The strait is biologically alive. Beneath these contested waters lies a surprisingly rich and delicate marine ecosystem. Sea turtles, dolphins, whale sharks, and coral reefs inhabit the same waters where giant tankers pass. Any military conflict, any large-scale spill would irreversibly destroy this environment. It is a cruel irony that one of Earth's most fragile ecosystems sits at the most militarized point on the oceans. But let us return to geopolitics, because the situation became even more complex in the past decade. China became the largest buyer of Persian Gulf oil. More than 40% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. This means Chinese economic growth depends directly on the stability of this 21-mile corridor. And China responded to this vulnerability in two distinct ways. First, it established a naval base in Djibouti, its first overseas military base, strategically positioned near the Gulf. Second, it invested billions in alternative energy routes, pipelines and gas lines that bypass the strait. China's maritime Silk Road is, in part, an attempt to reduce dependence on Hormuz. But India also depends massively on this strait, and its naval ambitions grow every year. Japan and South Korea, two of Asia's largest economies, are almost entirely dependent on oil that passes through Hormuz. If the strait closes, these nations would have strategic reserves for weeks, perhaps months, before facing rationing. And this leads us to a question that military experts have been asking in silence for years. What happens on the day someone actually closes the Strait of Hormuz? If this changed the way you see the world, subscribe now. Because the next story we tell might be the one no one else is willing to.